use cases of Web3 through DePIN.
This episode is brought to you by Natix Network, the world's largest camera infrastructure for mapping, autonomous driving, and physical AI. Ready to drive and earn? Check out the website right now at natix.network. Hello everyone, Dana from DEPINHUB here. Today we're interviewing Jon, CEO and co-founder of Beamable, a company revolutionizing game infrastructure with the use of DePIN. Beamable is transforming how game developers build and scale online experiences by moving away from traditional centralized crowd providers to a community-driven, decentralized way. Well, thanks so much for joining the podcast. It's so nice to have you here. And yeah, let's just get started. You introducing yourself, your background, and why you founded Beamable.
Hey, thanks for having me here. So, my name's Jon Radoff. I'm co-founder and CEO of Beamable. My background is this combination of game development, first of all. So I built games for very popular TV shows, so Game of Thrones and Star Trek and Walking Dead, and shipped games to 20 million players. I also built one of the first commercial games even on the internet called Legends of Future Past. So a lot of background in social systems and game mechanics and just shipping games, making them successful. And then the other half of my career is building development tools. So I started a company called ePrize. We built a web development platform and took that company public on NASDAQ, or to like 300 people. So have had that experience as well. So for the last 5 years at Beamable, I've been smashing those two experiences together. So I think to build a good development platform for game developers, number one, you have to have experience developing games and shipping successful games, because there's a lot of things you experience as a game developer that you'd really never gain an appreciation for if you were doing it only from the outside. But it's also not enough to just be a game developer. You have to have experience at productizing development platforms and scaling them up. And when it comes to the back end, you've got a lot of complexity because you have to make it work for millions and millions of users when you're talking about games. So a lot of technical complexity in both the tools as well as the infrastructure side. So we've been doing that for the last 5 years at Beamable, just helping games get launched and online. We're a business today that has a couple hundred games either already live or in development on the platform. So it's in use, a couple million people are playing the games that have been launched on the platform. And I think interesting for this conversation as we move into DePIN is it's Web3. Yes, we have some great Web3 developers, Mythical Games and Wildcard Alliance and Coin Games with Project O. So some of the best known Web3 games out there are on our platform, but also it's Web2, right? So there's a huge $200 billion a year market for games. And today, something like 99.9% of it is still Web 2 games. And what anything has ever shown me in the games business is you never really lose the old ways of shipping games or the old business models of games. You just keep adding more and more things. So Web 3 is going to be a new way of doing games, but it's not really going to take away from all these other games that we've got, which leaves them with a lot of infrastructure problems. To build a game today, they're all online games. Like it's 95%, literally 95% of the game business today from a revenue standpoint is online games. So the challenge with that is that it's proprietary infrastructure. You've got vendor lock-in. You've got various APIs that make you stick to one particular cloud service providers. The cloud service providers are very overpriced relative to bare metal service providers. And we want to fix all of that. We want to create an open ecosystem with an open source SDK that runs on a whole wide range of bare metal service providers, as well as the hyperscalers, if you want to go there, and do it in a way that gets you to market faster with your game. And the best way to do that is DePIN. DePIN was literally invented to solve this problem, create a heterogeneous network across multiple supply providers with open source and open standards so that everybody can have the benefits of interoperability, better economics, faster time to market, in community owned infrastructure. So that's what we're doing with Beamable now. So it's been an SDK up to this point, but now with the DePIN launch that's happening this year, we ourselves become a Web3 company with a token and all of that, not simply supporting Web3 games building on the platform.
That's a very good intro. Let's go back a little bit on what you said there. Like when you're building like your own game and you need to have it online, which is most of the games, most of the revenue, what kind of solutions are there currently that Beamable is trying to like solve?
Are you asking about competition specifically, or like the specific business problems the developer has?
Like for example, you said like I'm building my game and I need to figure out where I'm gonna host this infrastructure. Do usually, because let's say I don't know anything about gaming, right? At least on the developing side, there's already companies that are doing the infrastructure, so I just plug on that infrastructure and it's very expensive. Or do people usually build from the ground up how that infrastructure for online games is gonna work?
I'm gonna describe how a lot of this works and some of the problems that are solved, and this is really great for anybody listening in today. I'm sure almost everybody has played games, but you may not be fully aware of like how games are built and just how much of it is customized. So that's number one. The vast majority of games are kind of built from scratch. You have a few technologies that you can pull off the shelf, and you could broadly describe games as having two big chunks, the front end and the back end. So the front end of the game is the 3D graphics engine that delivers that experience to the player. And there's two main companies that do that today. There's Unreal Engine, which is from Epic Games, the same company that does Fortnite that most people know about. And then there's another one called Unity that went public a few years ago. And those are just the two most popular 3D engines. There's some other ones that are growing a lot, like Godot and stuff like that. But that's the front end. Okay. The back end, nothing like an Unreal or a Unity exists for that at all. So what you end up doing is using a combination of, if possible, off-the-shelf APIs. So in the past, there were companies like PlayFab or GameSparks, which was an Amazon product. GameSparks is a whole other discussion we should get to, because GameSparks had a couple thousand games on it, and then Amazon just decided that they wouldn't do that anymore, and they stranded 2,000 games. So in Web3, people talk about rug pulls. That was like the biggest rug pull in gaming, was not even Web3. It was like Amazon shutting down a couple thousand games by surprise. But you kind of have to assemble your backend from a lot of different pieces. Maybe an API like that, maybe some containerized compute at a hyperscaler, maybe coding a lot of modules yourself, maybe a matchmaking system from one place, a real-time multiplayer from another. So there's no highly structured composable environment for a lot of these backend components. And typically you would have to build them in one of these siloed technology stacks at one of the major hyperscalers. And typically games will build on Amazon, Azure, or GCP. Those are basically the three big ones as far as games are concerned. There are also some bare metal service providers in the gaming business. These are companies like i3D, for example. Those are really great for games that are at a lot of scale, but a lot of developers also find that they have to do a lot of added work to get things stood up on bare metal, because there's so much less software that's off the shelf that just instantiates all the backend code that they need. So this is a long way of saying that we're still in an era where so much of the backend has to be built from scratch, and it typically has to be built on highly siloed, very expensive service providers. What are the things that you end up building? Really, it's all the online functionality. So if you've got a real-time multiplayer game, that would include the game servers where the actual play sessions occur. It could include the persistent aspects of your game. So if you've got an MMO or something that survives beyond an individual session and you need to save account data or anything about that, like all of the storage of that. Could include social systems, things like leaderboards and events and guilds and chat, all these things that get people interacting with each other. It could include economic systems like payment systems and purchases and account histories. It could include the customer service systems that ties it all together. It includes the DevOps systems to go from getting code on a developer's workstation to eventually getting it on someone's device and being able to play. So content management and content updating systems. But it basically comes down to all of the things that happen in the cloud that require game servers somewhere on the internet to enable your game. And once you get beyond just single player game experiences, you almost always need some online functionality or game servers to do that. And Beamable was created to be the Unity or the Unreal of this market. To do that, you have to do a few things. Number one, you have to make the environment really easy to use. and you have to make it work within tools that the game developer already knows. So game developers know how to work in a 3D engine. So you have to provide more than just an API that can be called from a game engine. You actually have to have workflow systems and user interface and things that work right inside that 3D engine. So we focused a lot on creating the workflow and the really hands-on integration so that when you're sitting down to your workstation to build a game, all that back end of functionality just flows into it without even really needing to know anything about APIs. That's number one. Another is, unlike front end code, back end code has to scale. So you have to have immediate mechanisms to scale up for potentially millions, even tens of millions of users, and do it in a way that doesn't turn every game developer into a DevOps engineer or a server network code programmer, because that introduces many, many bottlenecks in your development process and also just high risk development. And the third, and I actually think the most important, is you have to be able to build an ecosystem around it. So the nice thing about Unity and Unreal on the front end is they have these really powerful ecosystems. You can go to the asset store for Unity, for example, and there's tens of thousands of software modules and art and all kinds of things you can download to build the front end of your game. No one has really done that for the back end. And the reason why is because of how siloed it is. No one really wants to contribute to an ecosystem that's bound up in one particular set of APIs at one particular cloud service provider. So that has really limited that market. And that's something that we're really hoping to change with DePIN. Because I think one of the really interesting things with DePIN is composability of what you can do once you have not only the server infrastructure in place, the ability to deploy servers and scale up the back end, but now that that's in place, you have the built-in payment mechanism where software modules could also be monetized and distributed. And you can really start to create that ecosystem around software modules that you can add to the back end of your game, just as you can on the front end with things like Unity and Unreal. We want to enable that on the back end, and DePIN is just a great path to do that. And the benefit of it, of course, is once you have access to all of these back-end components, you can get to market a lot faster, and you're not having to invent as much because lots of people have already solved these problems. They've just solved it in very siloed ways. So if we can break down the silos and make it available to everyone and essentially crowdsource all of the important, hard to build back-end components for your game, people can go back to just focusing on what's important, which is building a great game, differentiating it, marketing it, connecting with your player, and less about the R&D technological aspects that players, frankly, they don't care about. They care about it when it breaks, because then they can't play the game. But short of that, they don't even want to think about it, right? So that's what we're there to do, and that's the kind of problems people are solving.
Natix Network is revolutionizing the mapping in autonomous driving industries with its proprietary AI and Internet of Cameras. With over 244,000 registered drivers and 153 million kilometers covered, Natix is the biggest mapping DP network globally. Natix mobile app Drive uses drive assistant apps, example dashcams and navigation, token incentives, computer vision AI, and smartphone cameras to crowdsource real-time data, creating an open geospatial intelligence network that rewards users for its contributions. Natix recently introduced the VX360, a device for Tesla owners to access, manage, and monetize their car's 360 imagery and offer a game-changing solution for the future of mapping and autonomous driving. Own a Tesla? Head over to natix.network now and score your VX360 to have a chance to earn a bonus 100,000 Natix tokens. Use the code DEPINHUB and score an additional 12% off. Check the links in the description and let's go. Yeah, I mean, I think if you are able to solve I call it like monkey work, because it's a lot of times it's the same kind of work that you need to do anyway, something that's very important and needs to be there but it's just something that is just like monkey coding kind of thing, right? So if you can reduce that thing, and then the founders or the game producers, they can really focus on the game and what they're trying to do, not just building the roads. When did you realize that DePIN was a good solution for what you guys are trying to build? Because you've been in this for a long time.
We sort of had the idea before DePIN became a formalized term. So just another point about my background as a game developer, as we moved into building Beamable, the development platform, is I also built one of the first blockchain games, even before we used this term Web3 that everyone uses now for Web3 gaming. So the Star Trek game that we shipped, which is still available, by the way, you can go to the app stores, download Star Trek Timelines. But Star Trek Timelines was one of the first blockchain games as well. You don't hear about them too much anymore, but there was a company called Forte that was a early pioneer in blockchain gaming, and we worked with them and created a blockchain edition of Star Trek Timelines and minted 1 million wallets on their chain, actually. So we saw a lot of the issues, both from a game design standpoint for how you think about tradable currencies and tradable NFTs and how that affects game design, but also the technology aspects of how do you build the bridges between game servers and game clients and blockchain-based backends. So having been through that experience, that was part of the early DNA of Beamable. And we have had blockchain support from the very earliest days of Beamable as a development platform. Even though it's Web 2 and it's Web 3 and it supports all kinds of games, basic blockchain support for doing things like wallet-based login and inventory management and items, always part of the platform. And that's why we game companies like Mythical and Wildcard and CoinGains came to us, because they were building like real games inspired by the best of Web 2, but with blockchain backend. So we were a natural choice for that. From the earliest days of that, we always had this idea of decentralizing our technology. And in a way, we sort of thought of Beamable as like, how would you decentralize something like Roblox, right? So Roblox is actually the platform that's the closest to maybe the quote unquote metaverse. Maybe that and Minecraft together are the actual metaverse that we have today. The only problem with it is your tech stack is very integrated up and down the stack. So if you build a Minecraft game, there's no such thing as like a Minecraft backend, but you have a completely different front end with your own graphics systems. Same for Roblox. Like you get the 3D engine that they provide, you get their backend services, and you kind of get it all together, and you're stuck with their business model and their development tooling and their process and all of that. So we started to think about, well, what if we think of the 3D engine as the thing you choose on your own, and you just bring the 3D engine to your game development effort according to the kind of game you're building. Sometimes it'll be Unity, sometimes it'll be Unreal, sometimes it'll be one of these newer 3D engines that's coming along. How do you give the developer that independence to make the choice that actually leads them to the best game from the presentation standpoint? That's great. Other than that, now you've got this problem of how do you get different front ends working with a back end and generalizing the back end. So from the earliest days of Beamable, we thought about structuring the product in a way that the 3D engine choice would be different from the back end. And we just built it that way. Now, over time, what happened is people started saying things to us like, this became more of a thing a couple of years ago when GameSparks, the Amazon competitive product, shut down. They started saying, well, what happens if you go away? And it was a really challenging question. Of course, when you're a startup, you never want to think about, oh, well, we might not succeed, we might go away or whatever. But our customers, of course, think about that all the time, because when you're their back-end service provider, you potentially shut them down if you go away. We saw that with GameSparks. So first of all, we would never want to be in that position to do that. But it's also just a totally legitimate business question for them to ask. And it challenged us to think about, well, what is the solution for that? How could we actually structure our technology in a way that it can't go away and that people know that they could continue to carry on, even if now like the LabCo could no longer do as much R&D. So it requires you to do a couple things. Number one, you have to open source the tech stack. So we decided that that would be okay. We'll open source the tech stack. That alone isn't enough, though. It's not just enough to open source technology. There's tons of open source technology. Just because it's open source doesn't mean that you as a company are going to easily be able to take that, install it on servers, scale up, because scale up problems are really, really complicated. So you have to solve the scale up problem as well. And because we were always very crypto native in our business anyway, having supported games, we started looking at like, well, how would we actually decentralize the network infrastructure we thought about it in the beginning, but we really started to see with the advent of companies like Helium, who started to solve this problem at scale in a completely different domain. Like, okay, they figured this out, and I don't know, it was maybe only a couple of years ago that we actually started using this term DePIN to apply to this idea of taking the servers, or generally speaking, any kind of hardware infrastructure, and having this concept of community ownership around it. But that, of course, was the formalization of what we started the company with. And in some ways, it made our life a lot easier, because a lot of the structure for how you could deploy DePIN started to become more of a solved problem, so that we could focus on the domain expertise that we have in video gaming, which has a lot of very peculiar, specialized things that you need to do to build backends for games. And we can leverage a lot of this community insight that's happened with Helium and Demo and Render Networks and Aether and all these people who came before us, and applying that to our tech stack. So again, just started with open source and the realization that we could be so much bigger than a SaaS company with an API if we figured out how to, in an open way, inspired by the principles of open source, applied that to the network as well. And that led us very naturally to DePIN. And we started pitching that to our investors as well as new investors last year. A lot of people got super excited about it, particularly the crypto native funds like Bitcraft and Arca Digital and some of these other folks who came and put our Series A together that we announced a couple of months back. So that's how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, it's a great story. How would you explain in a very simple term, how does the Beamable network works in a DePIN infrastructure? Because I'm seeing that you have different nodes, and how does everything connects together?
Maybe at the risk of slight oversimplification, but just so you understand how it works, the main thing to know is that when I talk about backends for games, you're talking about servers. Games, online games, need game servers to run. So this is a DePIN network where the game servers are essentially the physical infrastructure that we are distributing and allowing access to. It's at the game servers where the workloads for games occur. And that includes things like everything from running game sessions to resolving rules to even things like certain forms of data persistence. All of that has to happen on game servers. Now, in our network, we call those container nodes. We call them container nodes because our game servers are essentially containers. We literally use like Docker container technologies and Kubernetes to implement the basic functionality of all of our game servers. And then within that, we include our code stack, our microservices, as well as any other containers and microservices that a developer might want to operate off of their game servers. So it's game servers that we distribute. And that's where the work of the network occurs. We also have validator nodes. So validator nodes are what we intend to actually roll out first for people that want to have to participate in the community ownership of this network. And the validator nodes, they have the important job of making sure that the games that provision workloads off the network match the actual workloads delivered from these container nodes. So we don't want container nodes claiming that they did services above and beyond what was requested. We don't want game to sort of try to minimize the requests that they made. So it all has to be like verifiable workload traffic. So validator nodes are essentially forming a consensus network to make sure that we're accurately accounting for all of the work, so that the suppliers on the network, which in our case are going to be enterprise grade data center capacity, like you have to have high security, high bandwidth access to actually operate game servers at scale. So you verify those, and then the supplier that was involved gets paid for it. So that's, two types. And then the third is what we call a router node, which is, you can kind of think of it as the API gateway that figures out things like quality of service and getting you to the correct container node according to a variety of criteria like geographic proximity and quality level that you're willing to pay for and things like that. So those are the three types, but most of the work, the sort of the day in, day out work happens at container nodes, validator nodes verify connections, and then router nodes are like the first point of contact that you have as a game server needs to establish connections with a container node.
So I would say that the validator node can be like a very simple computer, like a Raspberry Pi or something quite light, because it doesn't do any processing, right? And then on the container node, what is the requirements? Would you necessarily need to be on a data center, like a tier 1, 2, 3, whatever data center? Or I can run on my computer with a nice graphic card and nice CPU?
Yeah, so container nodes have a very high bar. So they have to be in secure data centers. They have to have that access to very high bandwidth. And they have to be continuously available. So the liveliness requirements to operate a game server on Beamable is very, very high because these are all commercial games operating. Like they can't just randomly have servers go down and stuff. So part of our network design is also doing reputation tracking. We will actually on-chain record uptime and things like that so that when router nodes make determinations about who to connect to, you can exclude nodes that just don't have sufficient uptime. So there's sort of like short-term, long-term answer your question as well. We do think that there's a market for lack of a better term, lower quality or lower SLAs in the game market because there are plenty of games that don't need as optimized latency, that might be able to tolerate a disconnection from a server and a reinstantiation elsewhere. That's fine. The only issue with making more of those game servers available on the network really comes down to things like security. There's a lot of security requirements for game servers, and we have to make sure that we're really happy with the security of these nodes before we start allowing anything below enterprise grade to participate in the network. So at network rollout, anybody will be able to operate a validator node. That's, like you said, it could be on a Raspberry Pi device or a phone. It could be on a lot of things. And we'll offer a node as a service option for people that just want to like operate it on sort of completely automated infrastructure. The container nodes are a different story. We want to make sure that the quality level of that is super high out of the gate. And we've seen this with other projects too, like Aether, I think, talks a lot about operating their GPUs on enterprise grade infrastructure. Well, for us, it's actually more CPU bound, by the way, like game servers are CPUs, not GPUs for the most part. So we want to make sure that bandwidth access, reliability, security is paramount there so that even AAA games are going to be totally comfortable with operating on this infrastructure. But yes, over time, our roadmap will be looking into things like how to secure nodes that might be operated. Still probably a fairly significant set of technical requirements, but maybe not in like a servers.com or i3D or G-Core type data center. That's probably a year or two off down the roadmap in terms of opening up the container nodes to that. But validator nodes out of the gate, accessible to anybody. And people that have data centers that they operate, like those are all the companies that we're talking to about adding supply to the network.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense, right? Especially when it comes to like, okay, maybe down the road, you want to enable anyone to do use their computers to as spare resource, and I think that can be good because those servers can be also much cheaper than running out of like a proper data center. And like you said, some games, maybe some indie developer wants to use that, and he's building a game. He already thinking about the way that these servers are going to work, the constraints around it as well. So I think that can be a very valuable solution as well for some people.
That will also be able to, sooner rather than later, offer people the option to spin up servers that they own and operate and earn the income from, but at sort of approved data centers where we know that it is secure and has the bandwidth and the reliability. So much more like node as a service type approach to deploying container nodes. So it's 100% part of the vision here to have total community ownership of all aspects of this. But anyone who's a game player out there you know from playing games, you want this super reliable. You don't want servers to go down. You definitely don't want someone spying on your data or cheating or messing with things in the server that you happen to be playing against. So like those are real issues in games, and it's real issues in a lot of online applications. So I think we'll see this pattern play out in a lot of DePIN projects where some node types get to full community ownership earlier than others, but we take it seriously that we want the network to be successful. And also, by the way, this is a network where there is existing demand. It's not like we are building supply and then we have to go find people to operate on it. Like we already have games that are operating on Beamable. Like I mentioned, we've got a couple million players a month already playing these games. So we need to make sure that the servers, when their traffic reroutes to DePIN off of what today would just be hyperscalers at Amazon, for example, that the quality of that, the security, all these things that I've just covered are there, comparable, if not better, at launch of the DePIN network.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that's also on the validator side, I think that you were mentioning about. That's why at DePINHUB, we released Nodi, right? Like we have a very capable team. We saw a lot of projects that require this kind of like set up like a node as a service. So like, for example, if you go to deepinhub.io/nodes, you can have all the information about a node as a service. Like hopefully we're going to also add Beamable there and then use our infrastructure to help people very, very easily deploy any of the validator nodes. I think that's something that we've been working in the past, like trying to figure out what's the easiest way. Because of course you can use a Raspberry Pi if you're a nerd like me. But if you don't have the technical capabilities, we're trying to figure out how can we help DePIN projects to, like get fast to market and get like onboarding a lot of new people into crypto. I think that's very important. I think if it gets too complicated, it's gonna really like make it so much harder for you to scale. Because Helium was a very good story when it started because it was so easy, just plug and play, connect your phone, and you're done. And just the thing just stays in your balcony or in your roof, and it's doing its work. Can we talk a little bit about the business model? How do you like see the money coming from outside of crypto to crypto? Like you also plan to doing buy and burn mechanisms. How do you see this tokenomics work?
So first of all, anybody will be able to go at a protocol level and just provision off the network. So we're adding more and more documentation to our website. You can go to beamable.network, see the white paper there, and we'll be rolling out more down at the protocol specification level. And one of the things you could do is provision directly off the network. And if you do that, it's like interfacing with an order book, essentially. The person who's requesting access to servers or microservices specifies what they're willing to pay and certain quality of service criteria that would be important for them. It matches you by the order book, and then server capacity is provisioned for you. So you can do that. The only downside of it is that's a fairly crypto native approach. Maybe some Web3 game developers will be comfortable with that. You'll be paying either in native token or USDC. So it's our intention at rollout to make it possible to pay with either. Like I've seen that in successful DePIN projects as well, where you have the option to use stablecoin as a pricing mechanism, which if you're a game studio, won't be surprised if the majority want that, just so that they can have stability in their underlying cost structure. So that's how you do it at the Web3 protocol level. Now, anybody is welcome to build what I'll call fiat gateways to that network if they want as well. We're going to launch our own. So beamable.com, the website where people go to today for access to the SaaS infrastructure, go there and they can either be invoiced or pay by credit card to get access to the existing infrastructure. Now, in the future, what beamable.com will do is kind of nothing changes, actually. Like you still swipe the credit card or get invoiced, except we are routing traffic directly to the DePIN network. So beamable.com controls how we deploy and provision server capacity. We'll be doing it off the DePIN directly, which means that when you're paying, we are then in the background going and purchasing server capacity off the DePIN network, which means that just like anybody else going in at the Web3 protocol layer is either paying in stablecoin or native token to acquire access to servers. So if you go to beamable.com, we remove all that complexity for you in terms of thinking about tokens and crypto and Web3. Just kind of feels like a SaaS product from that standpoint. The difference being, though, that because it's now shifted to that underlying Web3 infrastructure, we're really inviting anybody to do that. And we see a future where there will be multiple service providers on the network who specialize in different kinds of games. So, for example, in gaming, we have what are called AAA games. That's the really big budget games that are like $100 million plus budgets and take years and years to build. That's a different way of building a game than like the indie developer who might be 1, 2, 3, 4 people building a game where everyone's more multi-skilled and just the whole path to market is different. So maybe there will be service providers that specialize in just AAA or just certain kinds of indie games or even certain genres of games. Like someone will be a specialist in real-time strategy games and they know all of the exact requirements for real-time strategy game and have the tech stack totally figured out so that all of the container software that you deploy in the back end for that is kind of figured out for you in advance. We are inviting the world to go and build other versions of beamable.com, so to speak, build your own gateway into that, provide your own service infrastructure, your own payment infrastructure, totally fine. And that's sort of what's kind of neat and revolutionary about Web3 is it makes you completely rethink concepts like competition. So right now, we might see another back-end service company, for example, as a competitor to Beamable.com anytime that it's a different software module that someone could use. In the future, we think less like that, and we just think ultimately we're offering a domain-specific network built for the needs of game studios and game publishers, where a lot of the software on that network is going to be increasingly containerized code from people we might have formerly thought of as competitors. And we're not concerned if someone else wants to provide that gateway into the network, the payment rails and the service and support infrastructure, because we know that when we build this network, the network that we're building and the value that will be created there is many, many times larger than any one SaaS company, including ourselves, could do. So we're disrupting ourselves while we're still small enough to do that. Like we are generating millions of dollars of revenue on our platform already, but we're talking about a $35 billion industry here. I mean, games is a $200 billion industry. We look at the back end of games as being about 35 billion, and that's mostly going to hyperscalers today and a lot of kind of labor reinventing the wheel 10,000 times over that we talked about earlier. So, we're still pretty small. And in fact, anyone we might think of as our competitors are also very small. We want to be many hundreds, if not thousands of times larger than we are today. And we're going to do that by opening up the whole ecosystem and allowing anyone to participate. And we're just really passionate about doing it that way and also solving this problem once and for all in the game industry. Like make it so that game developers don't have to be the 10,001st group to spend millions of dollars reinventing the wheel again on siloed infrastructure, which could just go away at any time.
It's very crazy to think that a solution like that doesn't already exist, right? So you guys are building basically the base layer of a lot of the backend development that is required for gaming. Do you see the gaming industry like moving faster after like Beamable becomes like a common thing that everyone is using, the same way that use Unity to like, already have the marketplace for like just plug and play a lot of things, and the game developer just have to implement his vision and not reinvent the wheel?
Well, 100%. Like people are going to move faster. That goes without saying because it slows you down enormously to build backend code. And not only does it slow you down, it becomes a tax on your development because every time you add something, you have to think through all of the backend implications and it holds you back. And sometimes companies actually just get killed by the amount of effort that has to go into backend instead of the things that the player actually cares about. But that's not the only advantage. One is just increasing overall innovation in the game industry. So when you accelerate people's speed and reduce the amount of capital that they have to put into development, what you're actually doing is allowing them to take greater risks. And that's something we actually want to see in games. We want to see less of the same game repeated over and over again with just a new story and a new set of graphics. What I think everybody wants to see is more innovative games with new game mechanics that you've never seen before, with something completely new about it. And that's always hard to do in gaming when you have to sort of build this risk model that says, okay, we're putting all this capital into things. It has to be a little bit more predictable. Well, maybe with the same pot of capital, you could build 2, 3, 4, 5 games and try 2, 3, 4, 5 different things and figure out the thing that's truly innovative and creative and new and do it that way. So that's really the end result of like optimizing your development this much more, is that now the end consumer, the players of games, get more variety, they get higher quality games, you get more options to choose from, and less of seeing the same thing over and over again. And that's what I'm excited about as not only a game creator for many, many years, but a person who also plays games. I love games, and I want to see more stuff that's new brought to the table.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's very exciting. So what are the things that you already built until now? And how do you see Beamable shaping up for the next 5 years?
For the past 5 years, we've spent a lot on workflow tools. It's something that's really overlooked in back-end development is making it really work within the development frameworks that people are familiar with. It's actually not enough just to give people APIs and SDKs. You give someone an SDK, you're like, okay, now you figure out how to make it work with the rest of your systems. The problem with game development isn't really work like that. Like, it's got to work within the existing 3D engines, the existing programming languages, and the existing methodology that you use to build a game. And anytime you don't fit in, you're effectively asking the developer to add a lot more staff, build a lot of bridges, create kludgy middleware to connect one system to another. And that's where a lot of this wasted time actually happens. It's not only building the back-end systems for the 10,001st time, like we talked about. It's building all the interconnections and the connective fiber and glue across all these systems. So we're going to continuously really focus on the ease of development and the simplicity so that developers know that they can just sit down in front of Unity or Unreal or their favorite game engine, and all of this back-end complexity is just almost like an automagical extension of what they're already used to doing in the 3D engine. So workflow has been a huge investment. We've spent over $20 million of R&D at this point, really just building the tool chain. And a big portion of that is the user interfaces, the workflow tooling, and things like that. The other part of it is just automating the scale-out process and making it open and interoperable. And that's where DePIN comes in now, because DePIN is the next stage here, where we're taking a lot of the investments we've already made in automation, scale-out, server provisioning, auto load balancing, automation of tearing down servers, adding them, simplicity around container technology, making that, really easy is what actually allows us to build a DePIN rapidly. Because if we hadn't do that, we'd have an enormous task in front of us just to get to that point. So we spent a lot of time on that. And then those two work together, by the way, like being able to do things like debugging, for example, like very overlooked thing. But like when you're a developer sitting in front of Unity, just as one example, and you're building your C# code, C# is the language that Unity developers tend to use. With us, you are programming your server in C# as well. So it's a continuous, consistent development environment. You want to just be able to push a button and make sure that your backend code is published to the cloud and that you can now debug it in the cloud, right? So you've got a front end running on your machine, but you've got cloud code running as well. You need to be able to do things like set breakpoints on the server and see where something malfunctioned and change watch variables and all this kind of stuff that happens in like quote unquote normal debugging. Well, guess what? In most back-end development for games, there's nothing like that happens. Like people are basically back to coding circa 1980, where the server and the client are completely disconnected, and you're like doing all kinds of strange logging and exit codes and all kinds of crazy things just to even figure out where a problem exists. You don't have access to debugging tools. Debugging is just one example for where, as we've thought about the workflow, but also how it touches the scale out and deployment of servers, all of that stuff has to work in concert with each other and be very elegant from a developer standpoint to save them time so that they can focus on building a game and fixing problems, not going and figuring out how to even tame their server infrastructure. So these are the things that really add up, and they're, in terms of our R&D, but they're also the things that, realistically speaking, even large publishers can't effectively invest in those kind of workflows and software solutions because it's really just too hard, and they don't have the benefit of enough games and enough customers to amortize that development across all of them. And that's why 3D engines went out too, by the way. Like everything that we're talking about doing now for the back end is a story that played out about 10 or 15 years ago with 3D engines. So when Unity and Unreal had already been around for a while, but wasn't quite as easy to use. Unity kind of mastered how the ease of use played out within 3D engines. They made it much more composable. They created the ecosystem of downloadable code they called the asset store. Before then, game developers were building 3D engines themselves. And virtually everything we talked about, like reinventing the wheel thousands and thousands of times over, like happened there as well. And there were some large publishers that had their own 3D engines, and even the largest publishers have now shifted towards using off-the-shelf 3D engines. Why? Because when you do that, A, you gain the benefit of a company that's totally focused on its problem, and B, you're tapping into an ecosystem where you're crowdsourcing all the other components that plug into that environment. So yeah, that has just never happened with the backend, especially the crowdsourcing of plug-in components, what we would call composability in Web3. That is a big, huge part of why even the largest publishers can't do this themselves in an economic way.
And how do you see the project expanding in the next 5 years?
Well, I mean, we believe that the hyperscalers really are, their interest, it's co-opetition really, because the hyperscalers are more than welcome to be capacity providers on the network also. Like they've got the security and the reliability and the bandwidth access that I was saying was important for hosting servers in this environment. So they can play there, but we think it's going to become way less siloed in the future, much more built around open source and the openness of the network. So we've got our sights set on them. We want the game industry to spend on an open network the billions of dollars that they're already spending at hyperscalers. And this is a huge change in the market. And Beamable is just lucky that we had the backend technology already really baked. Like we hit product market fit on our SDK and a platform. And we had that DNA as a blockchain native company so that we understood how we could make this conversion over to the open network that is DePIN. So we want to take advantage of this market lead and all of this knowledge that we've gained having done this for a few years and help people make that change to an open network over the next few years, which ought to be billions of dollars out of value out there to capture. And we're optimistic that Beamable is going to be that network that will do that.
Yeah, well, LFG, right? I think that's a super exciting project. What you guys are building is super cool. I can imagine the amount of work that has been put on that already, and a lot of work still to grow, right? But I think it's definitely a really, really bright future. For the listeners out there, what are your last words? What would you like them to know about you and about Beamable?
Well, first of all, go to beamable.network. That's the website where the foundation has released the white papers and all the documents. And we've got a community. I'm blown away by how big the community has gotten really fast. We only announced the community at ETH Denver, which was like a few weeks ago. We've got 1.5 million members in the community already, which is insane. I didn't realize that there would be so much interest. I thought DePIN was maybe a little bit niche-y within the Web3 world, but I guess the intersection with gaming sort of blew up and a lot of people have gotten super excited about what we're doing. even though we've got 1.5 million members there, we want everybody who's interested in infrastructure and DePIN and the future opportunity to restructure the world around open community ownership of networks and hardware to come in and be part of it. Like, and be there early, because that's your opportunity to shape the future of this thing. So would love to have you join us at Beamable.network and be part of the journey. My passion is just saving developers a lot of money, but more importantly, getting them to market faster with more innovative games, where if they have an idea, they can go direct from imagination to the screen with the minimum amount of reinvention or risk taking that you've had to in the past. And DePIN to me is the most exciting innovation within blockchain generally since really the introduction of the stablecoin, right? So we're creating a whole new liquid asset class around compute. And it's going to be people who really understand how that compute can be deployed into particular industries that have massive hunger for it and know how to solve risks, development, runway problems, and ecosystem problems that have been endemic now actually for decades. So that's why we're there. We'd love you to join us on the journey. It's a huge market, a huge industry, and one that's already growing. And I think we have the demand already in the network. We're not talking about finding the demand after filling supply. So demand is there. And the demand is coming not only from great Web3 developers, but it's Web2. So if you've been hearing this thing for the last few years of like, how do we onboard game developers to Web3? Well, it's my belief that while Web3 games are a really interesting and important new category in gaming generally, the way to onboard game developers isn't but to get them to think about a new business model, because they may already have a game that they want to build in an existing business model. Let them just build the game that they want, but use the power of blockchain to save money, improve ecosystems, get them to market faster, essentially onboard them to Web3 in the back end where the player doesn't have to be touched. It's just the developer, and we make their life a lot easier. That's how we onboard game developers to Web3, and that's what we're going to do.
No, that's amazing. Thanks so much for joining the podcast, Jon. I think it's so interesting. I'm so excited to see. I think you guys build so much, but there's still so much to build, and then I'm really excited to see this journey. I really want to get you on the podcast again, maybe in a year, and see what's the progress of that going with like all the sales that you're doing and node sales and everything else that you're building. It can really be like a paradigm shift on how people build games, and actually for the people who are actually playing games like me, I think it's a massive, massive benefit as well. So for you who's listening out there, make sure to check deepinhub.io/project/beamable. Link for their social networks and also the website. Everything that you need is in there. Subscribe to our newsletter on deepinhub.io. And yeah, thanks so much for being in the podcast. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you listen to this. And thanks so much for joining, Jon. Happy to be here. Have a good day.
Thank you.